In Aleister Crowley's The Diary of a Drug Fiend, we are continuing Book 3, Purgatorio. We are in Chapter 1, King Lamus intervenes. A hot, fierce wave of annoyance went through me like a flush of fever. "Damn that fellow," I muttered. "Why must he always butt in like this?" And then I noticed that Lou had taken the little bottle from my waistcoat pocket and handed it to King Lamus. "I believe you're right, Basil," she said. "But if you take that bottle away from us, the responsibility lies with you." "Is that calculated to frighten me?" he answered, smiling. He rose to his feet. He dropped the bottle to the ground and stamped his heel deliberately on it. "Now," he said, "let's get down to business," resuming his seat. The fumes of the acid enveloped the table. "Hydrocyanic acid," he remarked, "is an excellent pick-me-up when absorbed into the system in this diluted form, but to take it in large doses is an indiscretion. There is no doubt that the man had a tendency to what in a woman is called nagging." He constantly used the word indiscretion as if it were a weapon. We both winced. "You accept me," he went on, "as responsible for getting you out of this mess." There was nothing else to do. It went against the grain, however. I blurted out something about being grateful. "You needn't talk that nonsense," he retorted severely. "It's my business to help people, to do their wills. The gratitude is on my side. I want you to understand from the beginning that you are helping me to justify my existence by allowing me to do what I can do to straighten out this tangle. But my conditions are that you give me a fair chance by doing what I say." He did not even wait for acquiescence. "You are a bit excited nervously," he went on. "Depression is only another form of excitement. It means a variation from normal tone. So when you have had your coffee, I will join you in a cup. We will go around to my studio and try what some of those tablets will do. Then, where are you living?" We told him we had gone back to our old place in Greek Street. "Hardly a salubrious neighborhood," he remarked. "I think we ought to celebrate the occasion by making a night of it in my studio. And tomorrow morning we must see about getting you some decent rooms. I remember that our supply of heroin was in Greek Street. You know, Lamas," I stammered. "I'm ashamed to admit it, but we really can't get on without H. We tried, in fact, once. We got clean away, but we couldn't possibly go through that again." "Nothing to be ashamed of, my dear man," returned our physician. "You can't get on without eating. That's no reason for stopping. All I ask you to do is to do it sensibly." "Then you won't cut us off?" put in Lou. "Certainly not. Why should I? You take as much as you want, and when you want, and how you want. That's no business of mine. My business is to remove the want. You say you cured yourselves, but you didn't. You only cut off the drug. The want remained. And as soon as the opportunity for starting again arrived, you started again. Perhaps, in fact, you made the opportunity." The man was really uncanny. I must confess it put me off, being hit every time like that, when I wasn't expecting it. But Lou took it in quite a different way. She was glad to be so thoroughly understood. She clapped her hands. I was amused. It was the first time in months that I had ever seen her make the slightest movement that wasn't absolutely necessary. "You're quite right," she said. We said nothing to each other about it, and I hadn't the slightest conscious intention of doing what I did. But the moment I got to London, I drove to the place where I knew I could get heroin, and when I got back, I found that Peter had been out trying to find the man who had sold him the cocaine before. I assure you, it wasn't deliberate. "That's exactly the trouble," retorted Lamus. "It leads you by the nose and prevents you from doing your will. I remember once, when I was making experiments with it myself, how I would go out with the intention of keeping away from the stuff all day, and how, without my knowing it, I took advantage of all sorts of little incidents that cropped up to get back to the studio some hours before I had intended. I found myself out at once, of course having learnt some of the tricks of the mind, and I sat and watched myself finding excuses for starting in. One gets into an absolutely morbid state in which everything that happens has some bearing on the question, shall I or shall I not take it? And one gets so pleased with oneself for saying no so often that one is tempted to reward oneself by saying yes just once. I can promise you a very interesting time watching your minds and spotting all the little dodges. The great thing I want you to remember is that you have to learn to take pleasure in what is really the most pleasurable thing in the world, introspection. You have got to find amusement in observing the details of the discomfort of being without the drug, and I don't want you to overdo it either. When the discomfort becomes so acute that you can't enjoy it properly, then is the time to take a small dose and notice the effects. I hope, by the way, you've been a good little girl and kept that magical diary." Lou was astonishingly pleased to be able to say yes. "Some of it's done very fully," she said. "But you know, there were days and weeks when I couldn't think, I couldn't move. Life was a perpetual struggle to get back to." She hesitated for a word, and then ended with a pained little laugh. "Oh, to anywhere." King Lamus nodded gravely. We had finished our coffee. "Now," said he, "to business," and led the way to the door. I stayed behind for a moment to pay the bill. There was still a faint smell of bitter almond in the air. It reminded me of how the dinner might have ended, and I trembled all over like a man in an ague fit. What was happening in me? Had I suddenly fallen in love with life, or had I simply become aware of the fear of death? When we reached the fresh air, I knew it was the former. Lamus had made me feel the effect of the drug had been to kill all feeling in me. My impulse to kill myself had not been so wholly negative as I had thought. It was a positive craving for what I supposed to be the anesthesia of death. The pain of life had been too much to endure, and the influence of King Lamus had been to brace me to meet life face to face, whatever it may have in store, and conquer it. I did not fear death any more than I had done in the old days. Flying over the lines, I didn't mind dying at all, but I wanted to die fighting. Lou was talking quite briskly to King Lamus on the steps of the restaurant, while the commissioner called a taxi, and I realized too that I loved her, that she was worth fighting to recover, and that I had been a cad to drag her down with me. I understood my jealousy of King Lamus, his colossal strength, even his callousness about women attracted them. The man himself had made me sit up and match myself against him. I wasn't going to have Lou see me constantly at a disadvantage. We drove around to the studio. The atmosphere invigorated us. I got an entirely new point of view about Lala. Before she had seemed to me a little more than part of the funeral. Before she had seemed to me little more than part of the furniture, but tonight she was the resident spirit of the place. She informed it, gave it a meaning. The intimacy between her and her master was not in any way personal. She was the medium by which his thoughts became perceptible. The fantastic appointments of the studio were projections in terms of material substances of his mind, interpreted through her consciousness. I had an uncanny feeling that if it were not for her, King Lamus would be invisible. In his mind, there was no difference between any two things, but through her mediation, he was able to pretend that there was. The studio was divided into several parts by arrangements of curtains. There was a perpetual soft noise of laughter, singing, and dancing, interrupted only by periods of intense silence, which was somehow more significant than the sound. The firelight threw doubtful shadow pictures upon the glass roof, and from time to time figures moved with intimate softness through the dark corners and out into the courtyard. These swathed and muffled forms possessed an uncanny quality of unreality. The studio was full of subtle incense. No smoke was visible. It was as if the atmosphere had somehow been impregnated with it. Our little party fell very silent. He had given Lou and myself some tablets which had the effect of silencing the nerves, the nervous restlessness which had begun to seize us after even so short an abstinence from heroin. I want you to hang on a little, explained our host. The sting of abstinence will make the indulgence worthwhile. You have noticed, I'm sure, that the vast majority of doses fail to produce any definite active effect. It was quite true. We had been cursing the drug for its failure to reproduce the original sensations. We had tried to overcome the difficulty by increasing the quantity, but a time had come when we were immune to its action, horridly aware of its absence, without obtaining any satisfaction from its presence. That stuff I have given you, Lamas explains, dilutes your symptoms and enables you, to some extent, to bear the discomfort. I want you to take advantage of the fact, to watch your discomfort as if it were somebody else. When you find that you can enjoy this instead of blindly rushing to heroin for relief, you will already have gone a long way in the direction of acquiring mental control. Several times during the night, Lala intervened vigorously, in such a way that it was impossible for us not to give her our attention. We found out later that this was part of the plan, that we were being watched for symptoms of acute disquietude, and that whenever these appeared, she interfered to prevent our dwelling on the subject. I was astonished to find it about 4 o'clock in the morning when King Lamus said, I've just been thinking that we should all be the better for a little heroin, and proceeded to hand it around. The effect was extraordinary. I was aware of an infinite sense of relief, but it was evanescent. It could only have been a few instants before I sank into a dreamless slumber. And with anything in life, whether it's needed or not, the idea of getting past the mere wants is an essential thing. And even beyond the need, pulling one,